I was watching that TV series Bali 2002 the other night, quite a good show, and it struck me, would the Bali bombings have ever happened had Australia not so slavishly toadied to US foreign policy, to its war on terror? Did we really have to get involved? Would hundreds of Australians have been killed or injured in the bombings in Kuta had Australia not been involved in the war on terror so assiduously following the Americans? Now, when the politicians return from their holidays, the inquiry into war powers resumes. In opposition, Labor promised an inquiry into war powers because in the US and the UK, Congress and Westminster, UK Parliament, they require a vote of elected members before they go to war. It is not the decision of one person. In Australia, however, it is the decision of just one man. That man used to be Scott Morrison, and now it's Anthony Albanese. It's the Prime Minister's call. It is a captain's call. One person alone decides. Now, the inquiry into war powers reform has heard both sides, people that want to maintain the status quo, the decision of one person, and those who want reform for a vote of Parliament. Unfortunately, if you look at the mix of this inquiry, it appears to be a fix. It appears to be stacked with sort of pro-war types or pro-status quo types. Here are a couple of hot takes. The Defence Minister under Scott Morrison, Linda Reynolds, the famous Linda Reynolds, here's her take. It was her strong opinion, she told Michael West Media, that Parliament should play no role in declaring war and in the engagement and deployment of defence personnel. Now here's another one. Liberal MP Andrew Wallace, the Deputy Chair of the subcommittee presiding over this inquiry, he said he was surprised that the Labor Party is even contemplating a change to a system that has, quote, stood us in good stead for many, many years. Stood us in good stead. Are we talking the 1 million people that died in Iraq, the hundreds of Australians injured and maimed, the PTSD, the trauma, the veteran suicides, the cost of war, the climate change impact, the dislocation, the creation of ISIS? That was the last time we went to war on the decision of one man, John Howard. That was Iraq in 2003. What a disaster that was. We went to war on a lie. We created, or we helped to create, ISIS, and 1 million people died as a result of that war, which we so sycophantically supported. Now, the last time we came back from war was Afghanistan. Look at that. 20 years stuck in Afghanistan for no result. 20 years, and the Taliban are now in charge once again. Indeed, the final scenes in Kabul as we evacuated in a hurry with the Taliban nipping at our heels and the Americans too, was redolent of something that happened 45 years earlier, the time before when we went off to war with the US, somebody else's war, a foreign war, and that was the Vietnam War. 250,000 soldiers dead, 2 million civilians died. There were decades of dislocation, recriminations, trauma, the treatment of women, disastrous for women and children. So when people claim that we are in good stead with the system at the moment and that we should have no vote before making this momentous, this serious decision to put young people's lives in danger, but do we go off to fight for Taiwan against China? There are many Australians that believe we do. Most of them have links to defence contractors and think tanks and so on. But what a ridiculous thing that would be, to get involved in a fight between the Han Chinese of the mainland and the Han Chinese in Taiwan. It is somebody else's war. Will we make the decision? Will one person, one man, make the decision to go off to fight China? The consequences are just unthinkable, really. But few Australians would argue with the case that if we were attacked, if Indonesia invaded, or if China invaded Australia, that we'd all don the khaki uniforms and fight. The fact is, we don't need to be in these wars, which we've been engaged in since the Second World War, without a proper parliamentary debate before we tootle off and just do what the Americans tell us to do. We've got some really good coverage at the moment of the debacle in defence spending by Rex Patrick, who was actually a submariner. He actually served under the water in a submarine in the ADF. He reckons there needs to be reform. And we actually canvassed most of the politicians in the last parliament as to their view on this. Most of them said no comment because they were either one of the major parties and they had this stance. Labor's stance was let's have an inquiry. Liberal stance was status quo. But not everybody stuck to the party position, especially the independents. The Greens, of course, didn't. They're mostly anti-war. 3 of the 4 ex-servicemen in that parliament, the other 2 being Bob Katter and Andrew Wilkie, the great Andrew Wilkie, the whistleblower, the Iraq War whistleblower Andrew Wilkie. 3 of the 4 said, no, we need to have reform. It should not be the decision of one person. The outlier there was Jim Molan, a former general. We're not doubting Jim's patriotism at all. He's got a distinguished military career. There's a lot of controversy over his role in Fallujah, and he appears to like a war. But 3 of the 4 who'd actually served and were then parliamentarians said, no, we need reform. So the fact that a subcommittee is debating such a huge decision, which will affect Australia's future in such a dramatic way, this needs everybody to get involved. So if you're concerned and you want reform, please write a letter to your MP, share this video, help support us and keep pushing this stuff out there. We really do need reform. It's a ridiculous situation that one person can decide to send young Australian troops to a foreign war.